Viterum coram Deo explorata, ad conditionem certam perveni.
Dear brothers, I have convoked you to this consistory not only for the 3 canonizations, but also to communicate to you a decision of great importance for the life of the Church. After having repeatedly examined my conscience before God, I have come to the certainty that my strengths, due to an advanced age, are no longer suited to an adequate exercise of the Petrine ministry. I am well aware that this ministry, due to its essential spiritual nature, must be carried out not only with words and deeds, but no less with prayer and suffering. However, in today's world, subject to so many rapid changes and shaken by questions of deep relevance for the life of faith, in order to govern the bark of St. Peter and proclaim the gospel, both strength of mind and body are necessary, strength which in the last few months has deteriorated in me to the extent that I have had to recognize my incapacity to adequately fill the ministry entrusted to me. For this reason, and well aware of the seriousness of this act, with full freedom I declare that I renounce the ministry of Bishop of Rome, successor of St. Peter, entrusted to me by the cardinals on the 19th of April, 2005, in such a way that as from 28th February 2013, at 8 p.m., the See of Rome, the See of St. Peter, will be vacant, and a conclave to elect a new Supreme Pontiff will have to be convoked by those whose competence it is. Dear brothers, I thank you most sincerely for all the love and work with which you have supported me in my ministry, and I ask pardon for all my defects. And now let us entrust the Holy Church to the care of our Supreme Pastor, our Lord Jesus Christ, and implore his Mother Mary, so that she may assist the Cardinal Fathers with her maternal solicitude in electing a new Supreme Pontiff. With regard to myself, I wish to also devotedly serve the Holy Church of God in the future through a life dedicated to prayer.
Toto ex corde servire vili.
Well, what a surprise it was for the whole world today, for the Church, to hear that Pope Benedict had announced his resignation at a consistory of cardinals which took place in the Vatican over the weekend. And he announced on Monday that he was going to step down as Pope. Why has the Pope done this? He has done it because he is consistent in his leadership. He was interviewed about 2 years ago by Peter Seward, and Peter asked him the question about the possibility of a Pope and Benedict himself ever resigning. And he said that the time may come when such a thing may happen. And I wish to quote the very words that he said to this writer. He said, "When a pope realizes clearly that he is no longer physically, mentally, and spiritually capable of carrying out his role, then there is legally the possibility and also the obligation to resign." And the canon law, the laws which govern the Church, Canon 332, paragraph 2, talks about the resignation of a pope and says, if it happens, there are 2 conditions that are necessary. First, it must be free. And secondly, it must be properly manifested. Again, it's technical language, and I would like to just quote the canon. The canon says, should it happen that the Roman pontiff resigns from his office, it is required for validity that the resignation be freely made and properly manifested, but it is not necessary that it be accepted by anyone. And the Pope stated clearly in his statement to the cardinals and to the church, the whole church, that what he was doing freely. And you know, what better time to do it now when he still has his wits, he still has his reasoning, he still is mentally alert, he still is strong enough to make this decision, that he isn't under any undue stress or pressure to do so. And secondly, because he did it before the consistory of cardinals, it's public. And therefore, it has met the two criteria. And so the Pope has announced his resignation as Supreme Pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church. The first time in some 600 years. You know, this took us by surprise today. But it is all part of God's will and God's plan for this Pope, who has discerned what he had to do from serious prayer and taking time to examine his conscience, as he said, in light of his ministry, his Petrine ministry in the church, and he came to the conclusion that now was the time to resign and to allow the College of Cardinals, that 120, apparently there are 117 eligible right now to vote, to elect a new Pope, that he will put it in their hands now to set about doing this task, accomplishing it. So what's going to happen next? On the 28th of February, the Pope will resign. When he hands in his resignation at 8 p.m. on that night, it comes into effect, and he will retire then to Castel Gandolfo, which is just outside of the city of Rome. And he will spend time there, and eventually he'll return to the cloisters of the Vatican, where he will continue to live out his time as a bishop. He'll forever be a bishop. And he's a prolific writer and theologian, and I'm sure he will continue in a more peaceful and calm way to do the work that he is really great at as Pope. What happens next after the 28th? After the 28th of February, the cardinals will have to be called, those 117 of the 120 who are needed for going into conclave to elect a pope, and there will be a conclave. And conclave means they're going into the Sistine Chapel and they're going to lock themselves in for a period of time. We don't know how long it will take to elect a new pope, but it is estimated that by the middle of March, who knows, we may have a new pope. Certainly by Easter, we may have a new pope. A new set of hope for celebrating the resurrection of Christ at the end of Holy Week, and to continue the march forward of the church. This is an interesting time for the church, and it is an interesting time for all of us. And you know what? This man is a man of valor. He is a courageous man and a daring man, a little man with a lot of spirit in him, and he knows what is best for the church. I admire him. I have been a bishop under him for the past 8 years. He made me, Archbishop of St. Lucia, of Castries in St. Lucia. And I have been close enough to him to know something about him. And what I can say is that he has a fatherly spirit. He has a very humble heart, and he is a man of great courage.
I have 3 questions that I'd like to ask.
Uh-huh.
First of all, what was your initial reaction on hearing of the Pope's decision to resign?
Well, I was outside. Normally, it's chapel time for me when that news came. My secretary, Sav, was calling me, and she didn't get me, so she called the brothers who live next door to me to tell them to get me because there is breaking news about the Pope. And I was outside. I love photography and I love orchids, and I was shooting some orchids out on the veranda outside because they're just in bloom now. They're in my home and they're beautiful, and that's what I was doing. I broke from my chapel and I was just about to go back into the chapel when I heard Brother DeLellis's voice. "Bishop, come, wherever you are, there is breaking news." And I kind of moved quickly, and there it was, the Pope. So I didn't just take Sav's word for it. She says, "This is the news, find out more." So I went and I Googled Vatican News, and I confirmed it. So I called our secretariat in Port of Spain for all our bishops' conference, and I said, "Have you heard the news?" He said, "What news?" I knew then he didn't hear the news. So I said, "Well, there's breaking news. The Pope has handed in his resignation, and at the end of February, he's going to cease being Pope." And he said, "What?" And immediately, he Googled right there and he found the information. I said, "Please send it out to all the bishops, So, there was that moment of tremendous surprise, almost shock, so unexpected, and yet it was true.
What role is he expected to play, if any, after he officially steps down?
Yeah, well, he said that the role he would like to play for the church is to continue praying for the church. So he'll have a ministry of prayer for the church. And of course, as I said, knowing Pope Benedict, he is a prolific writer. He's a great theologian. He is a man with a tremendous mind. And he's going to put those gifts at the service of the church. I have no doubt about that.
Finally, sir, would you like to comment on the fact that it has been some 600 years, as you made mention a while ago, since the last resignation?
Yeah. Well, isn't it wonderful that we are the ones who can be the beneficiaries of this, that after 600 years that something like this can happen, and it shows again that he's a brave man. I would say the Pope looked at how Pope John Paul deteriorated probably in the final 2 years of his life. He was stricken with Parkinson's disease, and then he had other challenges, and Pope Benedict was smart. He said, "There's no need for this, to impose this on the church." He's practical in that way. He says, let somebody else take my office. And but he himself had said something. He was asked a question by that same Peter Sewald in the book, The Light of the World, where Peter interviewed him. And Peter asked him, do you leave your office when, there's the heat is on? And he said, "No, that's not the time to leave. That's the time to stay there and do what you have to do. You can't just say, let somebody else face the heat for you. You do what you have to do. And when the time comes, you have to know what's the next step." And I think he has shown that he has suffered through that whole period of time with, when there was all these sexual abuse allegations and all these major kinds of challenges were before the church. and he didn't run away from them. He, as a pastor, as a shepherd, and as a leader, he faced the music. And he has put things in place that the church will be eternally grateful to him for. Again, because he had the capacity for doing that. And that would be one of the contributions he would have made when history writes his story.
Question. In the past, we have always seen, popes always at a certain age, and then, as you said, they deteriorate after a certain amount of time. Do you feel with this one, we should have like a younger pope where we will not get such problems in the future?
Well, don't forget that, some of these men who deteriorated were young when they were made pope. John Paul was one of the youngest men to be made pope in a long time. Like he was something like 58 when he was made pope. He deteriorated partly because he was shot. He suffered a lot. There were 2 attempts on his life, in his lifetime. So these things affect a person's health, And, but I will say Benedict may be setting a trend, showing future popes that they don't have to suffer, unnecessarily in the office, nor do they have to carry a burden that is way beyond them. When the age comes upon them, ill health comes upon them, and they know it's time to let somebody else take the responsibility. It can be done. He has shown that it can be done, and there is precedence for it. There's a law to cover it and to guide the church, and he's brave enough to do it. And I'll say future popes will do the same.
I just have one question. I don't know much about the rules of the church too much. I was just wondering, wouldn't it have been better for him to inform the elders of the church first before making a decision? I don't know.
What do you mean by that?
At least inform the bishops, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, you know what the kind of world we live in now? He himself spoke about the rapid changes that are taking place in the world. Communications is also, so rapid now and so quick that by the time he informs the bishops all around the world, the news will be out. Somewhere it will be leaked in 101 ways. So he did the smart thing, which is to work with his core group, which is that group of cardinals, who surround him in his ministry. And he consulted them, he told them what he was planning to do, and he gave them the declaration. And through them, the communication was made to the rest of the church.
Archbishop, one other question. We'll
Sure.
make it to first of all, could you tell us whether or not he was the Pope Benedict will go down in history as having served for the shortest period of time?
No, I don't. He's not. Remember, there was between Pope Paul VI and John Paul II, there was a pope who was elected, Pope John Paul I, and he only lasted 31 days, 1 month, roughly about a month.
I was not aware of that. But
Yeah.
what do you think that Pope Benedict will be most remembered for?
Yeah. Well, this is what his mind, the theological reflection that he brought to the office of the Petrine office, and the way he was able to take up these difficult questions of the church in our times and give a response to them, a theological response from a deep reflection that came from deep within and from his own great mind and capacity to think through things.
A last hurrah for Pope Benedict. Tens of thousands of pilgrims traveled from around the world to attend Wednesday's weekly audience, held exceptionally in St. Peter's Square to accommodate the crowds.
I've come today to say goodbye and thank you to Pope Benedict. I'm feeling excited and very grateful in my heart for his leadership of the church and his role as my father, my spiritual father.
As he arrived aboard the Pope Mobile surrounded by bodyguards, Pope Benedict XVI took the time to greet the faithful. 8 years ago, German-born Joseph Ratzinger was elected to be the 265th leader of the Catholic Church, a task that Pope Benedict says was both a joy and a burden.
In quel momento, come ho già speso più volte,
At times, some words have struck a deep chord in my heart, and I have asked myself, Lord, why are you asking me to do this? What do you want from me? There was a very heavy weight on my shoulders. But if you are asking me to do this, if your word is there to steer me despite all my weaknesses, I'm sure you'll steer me in the right direction.
Starting Thursday, the Pope will retreat to a residence south of Rome, leaving 1.2 billion Catholics without a pontiff until the next leader is chosen.
But our feeling is that we're losing a father, a kind of father, and it's very important for us to come and to be grateful for him for all he did.
It was a sad day for many, but throughout the square, one phrase resonated louder than all the others. Thank you.
Holy Father saying, one of you in this College of Cardinals will be the future Pope.
Wow.
Talking about the need for reverence and obedience. The Holy Father's going to now impart his apostolic blessing. Cardinals rising to their feet. And let's prepare together to receive his apostolic blessing.
Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus.
Amen.
I think his legacy is going to be Christ. How Christocentric this man is, his thinking, his living, his praying. And once again today, it's going to be Christ who is the guide at the bark of Peter. Yes. And Christ is the reason for the church. And he has stressed a number of times in his pontificate that it is not he who is important as the Pope. Yes, he is the successor of Peter, but it is always Christ that he, as the Pope, looks to, that the faithful should look to, whether they're the faithful cardinals who work with him or us, the faithful.
I like what he had to say about them working together as an orchestra. He really he spoke to them as a body, no matter where they are throughout the world, even the ones who aren't here. He said, you know, he's a musician, and of course this reference to music, which he's made throughout his pontificate, and he encouraged them to work together.
Greeting all of his people,
carrying the stick,
the Swiss Guards, and there's
applaud last time,
and looked like Cardinal Saraiva Martins, I think, was one of the people there. Well, I think that is also Cardinal Angelo Comastri at his right. He's the archpriest of the Basilica of St. Peter's. And there they are, bidding a fond farewell.
But look, Matthias, he gives the ring with him, yes.
Heading out, the Vatican flags, the yellow and white colors of the Vatican, on the front of his car, go through the archway, drive through the Vatican gardens to the heliport. At least for a while, when he comes back and to live at the monastery, he will be able to, there are a portion, he can walk in all of the Vatican gardens if he wishes. And then there is a very nice little garden area. They were working on that last week. The gardens house the original buildings of Vatican Radio, for example. There's the Lourdes Grotto. I don't know I didn't see the car go by the Lourdes Grotto. Not that he would stop or anything, but no, indeed, the Vatican Gardens will, it's believed, still be able to be visited by tourists. They're only small groups. But the area where the Holy Father would live would just not be accessible. Here you see the heliport, obviously. There he is, saying goodbye again, people seeing him off there. Cardinal Sodano just walked in front of the screen. Cardinal Laiolo,
yeah.
On the left.
Gianna Maria.
And here you will have, I mean, you've got the gendarmes, you've got probably the Air Force people, you have the Vatican Fire Department, so.
Last goodbye.
And there's Monsignor Georg, his secretary, who just walked off camera on his right. Oh, how beautiful,
Yeah,
the 5 o'clock
yes.
bells. Oh. It's amazing, Paul, on this set, these last days, how many of the papal events have begun or ended with bells. His final words and leave-taking of us yesterday at the audience.
Right.
His final words.
Yes.
The bell at noon of the Angelus.
But now it's even the biggest bell. Now it's St. Andrew bell.
Oh, you know what? They were supposed to ring the bells. You're right. The bells all have names.
Yeah, the biggest one.
Oh my gosh,
The last
that's
time.
chilling. Oh, that is awesome. Oh my gosh. Oh, all the bells of St. Peter's, folks. Now the San Damaso clock says 5:05. That.
It takes off. Off years.
Wow. This was pretty special for both of us. You who have known him far better than I met him as Cardinal Ratzinger and as Holy Father, but wow.